Hi, it's Ashley, and for this week's Make It Relevant video, I wanted to examine Coleridge's Christabel, a lyric poem, with a more contemporary version of lyricism to examine experimentalism in both rhythm and meter and how this bolsters the image being portrayed in the text. So I wanted to examine Elliott Smith. And a little background on Elliott Smith. He's a indie artist from the 90s who is most famous for his album Either Or, where several songs were featured on the film Good Will Hunting. He was nominated for a Grammy, but didn't end up winning. And unfortunately, Elliott Smith is more famous for his drug addiction than his musical geniusness. He suffered from severe drug addiction and depression, and this was seen throughout his performances in the late 90s and the early 2000s until his death in 2003. So because of his drug addiction, his musicality and his experiments with chord progressions were generally overlooked. So I think both Elliott and Coleridge have these similarities in their respective periods, where Coleridge also suffered from drug use and was using these experimental forms within his work but was being overlooked, but both of which are pretty famous after their death. So I wanted to take a look at Elliott Smith's song A Fond Farewell from his posthumous album From a Basement on a Hill, where we see a lot of contradictories or paradoxes. So already in the album name, From a Basement on the Hill, we see this image of both underground and above ground, and these work together to create this sort of dissonance. So throughout the song, Elliott is talking about his struggle with drug addiction and how it is claiming his life. And he uses what's called the relative key paradox, where he situates the song in F sharp major, but he uses a B flat minor, which is outside of the key signature, to bolster his lyrics. So already this style is extremely experimental and is not often used in current work, where we see a pretty familiar four-chord progression, generally in C major. So he uses this as a fitting tonal backdrop for all his various contradictory elements within his work. So if we look a little closer at A Fond Farewell, we see in the first verse, the B flat minor come, and the lyric it situates itself with is pitch burning on a shining sheet. So here the words burning and shining are opposites, where one suggests something fizzling out and one suggests one shining through, which articulates the dissonance between Elliott's drug addiction and how it is fueling his death. So he's burning out in his life, but his drug addiction is increasing. And later on, we hear B flat minor again, and paired with the lyrics disconnecting from the missing link. And so the missing link and disconnecting from it creates another dissonance that is interesting to the listener, because it situates his drug addiction and how he feels that he has missed the mark. So what's important with this stylistic component of the song is that the sound of a chord, that is outside of the key signature, it signifies something in the listener's ear, and it creates this feeling of dissonance and this discomfort, and it kind of adds to the horror of his deemed emo music, and it creates a very dark image of his untimely death. And unfortunately, From a Basement on the Hill was released posthumously, so this song is talking about his death and is published after his death. So it's very grotesque and quite scary, but it is also incredibly stylistically advanced. So similar to that, Coleridge's Christabel has these elements where Dr. Sigler stated that there are stylistic components that are very experimental with rhythm and meter. So we see this in lines 175, where he states the moon shines dim, and here we see a paradox of the words shining and dim to create this juxtaposed dissonance as they work together to create this kind of horrifying image. And we see this again in line 181, where he says figures strange and sweet, strange being the opposite of sweet, being yoked together to create this image of dissonance and this image of discomfort. So I wanted to look a little closely at lines 550 and 552, where Coleridge uses this contradictory paradoxical language to bolster the meter that is being used. So he states, "I stooped, methought the dove did take, when lo, I saw a bright green snake coiled around its wings and neck." So here, both lines 550 and 551 are in iambic tetrameter, so there is 4 syllables being emphasized, but then in 552, we see only 7 syllables and the meter shifts so that the word coiled is stressed. Now, coiled signifies this kind of yoking together of green snake and dove, both images of good and evil, because the green snake is with the serpent and and the dove with Christianity. So these are yoked together to create a dissonant feeling of horror. So I'm running out of time here, but I wanted to show these two men together because both of their work is fragmented and is relatively incomplete, both Elliott with his posthumous release and Coleridge with his unfinished poem. And both of these things work together and they create experimental meter and rhythm, and how these bolster the paradoxes and the contradictions within their lyrics that ultimately situate the reader into a very uncomfortable and dissonant and horrific image. Thank you.